The disappearance of Malaysia Airlines Flight 370. It's pretty much the greatest mystery in the history of modern flight. Now today, we're going to try and set aside all the theories, all the speculation, and just focus on one thing, the data. We're going to walk through the flight's final hours, piece by piece, following the electronic breadcrumbs the plane left behind. All right, let's get into it.
So here it is. This was the plane, 9M MRO, a Boeing 777, which is, one of the safest and most reliable jets ever made. This photo was taken just about a year before it vanished. And on March 8th, 2014, this was supposed to be just another totally routine flight.
But this story isn't really about a machine. It's about the people, 239 of them, 227 passengers, and a crew of 12. As we dive into all this cold, hard data, it's just so important we don't forget the human beings at the very heart of this.
So the night starts off completely normal. MH370 takes off from Kuala Lumpur. It's heading to Beijing. A standard overnight red-eye flight, the kind that happens thousands of times a night all over the world without a single problem.
But less than an hour in, it just disappears from air traffic control screens. So the big question for us today is this. What does the actual electronic trail, the radar pings, the satellite signals, what does it all really tell us about what happened in those next few hours? Okay, so let's start right at the beginning. For the first 38 minutes, this flight was, boring. It was totally unremarkable. The plane was climbing, the pilots were talking to the ground, and it was following its flight path just perfectly. And here you can see the planned route. It's heading northeast from Kuala Lumpur out over the South China Sea. Now, see that point labeled Igari? That's just a navigational waypoint in the sky. It's also where Malaysian Air Traffic Control was supposed to hand the flight over to their counterparts in Vietnam. You gotta remember that name, Igari. It's crucial, because it's right at that handover point. That's when the normal flight ends, and this huge mystery begins. This is the exact moment everything changed. So at 1:19 in the morning, local time, the cockpit gets the instruction to switch over to Vietnamese control. And the reply comes back, totally calm, totally routine. Good night, Malaysian 370. And those were the last words ever heard from MH370. Now, just look how fast this all happens. At 1:19, you have that final voice call. About a minute later, it crosses that IGARI waypoint. But then, and get this, just 42 seconds after that, its little icon on the air traffic controller's screen, it just blinks out. It's gone. So why did it just disappear like that? Well, it comes down to something called secondary radar. Basically, there's a box on the plane called a transponder, and it's constantly shouting out, hey, I'm MH370, I'm at this altitude, I'm going this fast. For that signal to just stop, the transponder either lost power or someone in that cockpit turned it off. But here's the thing, just because it was invisible to civilian air traffic controllers didn't mean it was totally invisible. While one system went blind, another one was still watching. And that system is called primary radar. Think of it like old-school radar. It doesn't need a friendly transponder, it just bounces radio waves off of any object in the sky. And Malaysian military radar picked up a blip, an unidentified target that made a sharp turn west, flying right back over the country. They believed it was MH370. So this data tells us something huge. The plane didn't just fall out of the sky at Igray. No way. It turned and flew on a completely new path, back across the peninsula, and then northwest up the Strait of Malacca. The military tracked it for a whole other hour, until 2:22 a.m., when it went beyond their radar's range. So now it's gone from all radar, and you'd think, okay, that's it, the trail is officially cold. But it wasn't. A new, much fainter electronic trail started to appear, painting this ghostly picture of a plane that just kept on flying for hours, out into the middle of nowhere over the Indian Ocean. This new data came from a series of automated handshakes between the plane's satellite communication system and a satellite way up in orbit. The best way to think of it is like your phone checking for a signal. It just sends out a little ping that says, hey, I'm still here, I'm on. It doesn't give a GPS location, but it confirms one absolutely critical fact. The plane was still powered on and flying. And you can see that ghost journey right here. The first ping happens at 2:25 a.m., just 3 minutes after it vanished from military radar. And then, almost like clockwork, every hour, ping, 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 for 5 more hours. This plane was just flying on, silently, for way longer than anyone could have possibly imagined at the time. And here's something that's just chilling. During this long, silent flight, the airline actually tried to call the cockpit twice using a satellite phone. And we know the calls went through. They should have made a sound and lit up a screen for the pilots, but nobody answered.
And that brings us to the very end of the data trail, the final signal that came from the plane. This last little piece of information is what would go on to define the entire search for MH370.
At 8:19 in the morning, that's more than 7 hours after the final goodnight, the plane sent its seventh and final ping. And investigators think this last signal was probably triggered by the plane's power system rebooting, which would happen if the engines flamed out after finally running out of fuel. And then there's one last data point, or really, a lack of one. At 9:15 a.m., the satellite on the ground sent out its next scheduled hourly check. But this time, there was only silence. No reply. The electronic trail had finally gone cold. The flight was over.
So in the end, this is what the data gives us. It tells a story, it gives us a timeline and a rough location, this massive remote arc in the southern Indian Ocean where the search has been focused. The data is a silent testament to the what, the where, and the when. But the one thing it cannot tell us, and maybe may never tell us, is the one thing we all really want to know. Why?